"You're overreacting, he's just a friend," Harper said when I brought up my concerns about Damien for the third time that month, her voice carrying that particular tone of exasperation that had become increasingly familiar. I suppose that's when everything really started to unravel, though I didn't realize it at the time how much that single conversation would change the entire trajectory of our relationship. I'd been running my gourmet sandwich food truck in Portland's Cart District for 3 years, building something I was genuinely proud of from the ground up, starting with a used truck and a dream of creating locally sourced, innovative sandwiches that combined comfort food with sustainable ingredients. Harper had been part of that journey for the last 2 years, and I'd always respected her creative talents and professional ambition. She worked as a graphic designer at a prestigious downtown advertising agency, handling campaigns for major Pacific Northwest brands, and her artistic eye and marketing insights had actually helped me develop my truck's visual identity and social media presence. But lately, something fundamental felt different about us, and this coworker named Damien seemed to be at the center of every conversation and conflict. I wasn't naturally a jealous or controlling person, having always believed that trust and independence were essential components of any healthy relationship, but when your girlfriend starts having late-night work sessions with a specific male coworker 3 times a week and weekend coffee meetings to discuss projects that apparently couldn't wait until Monday morning, you start to notice patterns that feel less like professional collaboration and more like something else entirely. The shift had been gradual at first, starting with casual mentions of Damien's creative insights and his understanding of industry pressures, then evolving into detailed discussions about his career advice and personal philosophy about work-life balance. When I gently mentioned that their frequency of contact seemed excessive for normal professional collaboration, Harper immediately went on the defensive, accusing me of being controlling and insecure, suggesting that my concerns stemmed from my own professional limitations rather than any legitimate relationship boundaries. I tried to explain that I wasn't attempting to dictate her friendships or professional relationships, just expressing that some mutual boundaries might be healthy for our relationship's emotional security. That's when she delivered the line about me overreacting and emphasized that Damien was just a friend who understood the pressures and creative demands of her industry better than I possibly could, given my different career path and priorities. The conversation escalated quickly in my small apartment above the food truck, with Harper becoming increasingly defensive about her need for professional mentorship and what she called emotional support that I apparently couldn't provide. She admitted they'd grown emotionally close over recent months and that she'd been confiding in Damien about our relationship problems and personal struggles, which felt like a profound betrayal I hadn't seen coming. I could see the guilt flickering in her eyes as she explained how Damien provided intellectual stimulation, career guidance, and emotional understanding that she felt was missing from our relationship, essentially telling me I was inadequate while justifying her emotional affair. Rather than fight or plead my case or demand she choose between us, I felt something fundamental shift inside me, a sudden clarity that surprised me with its completeness and finality. I looked directly at her and calmly said she was absolutely right, that I had been overreacting, and that I genuinely appreciated her honesty about their connection and what she needed. The confusion that immediately crossed her face told me she'd expected anger, jealousy, dramatic confrontation, maybe even a desperate fight for her attention and commitment. Instead, I thanked her for helping me understand exactly where we stood and suggested she should probably spend more time with people who truly understood her needs and could give her what I apparently couldn't. From that precise moment forward, I began treating Harper with polite indifference, the courteous but distant way you might interact with a pleasant acquaintance rather than someone you'd been building a future with and considering proposing to within the year. I started focusing entirely on my business expansion plans, researching potential brick-and-mortar locations and sustainable sourcing partnerships, while mentally preparing for the inevitable end of a relationship that had clearly already concluded in Harper's heart and mind, even if she hadn't fully recognized or acknowledged that reality yet. Harper's 25th birthday arrived 2 weeks after our conversation about Damien, and I maintained my new emotionally detached approach while still fulfilling basic relationship obligations like acknowledging the occasion and preparing what I considered an appropriately thoughtful dinner celebration. I'd already planned a small gathering at my apartment, nothing elaborate given the current circumstances of our relationship, but enough to avoid seeming petty or vindictive to our mutual friends who would undoubtedly hear about whatever eventually happened between us. What I hadn't expected was Harper's younger sister Hazel showing up completely unannounced that Saturday afternoon, having driven her beat-up Honda Civic up from her marine biology research station on the Oregon coast specifically to surprise Harper for her birthday weekend. Hazel was 25, a dedicated graduate student completing her master's thesis on sustainable fishing practices and ocean conservation policy, and I'd always found her refreshingly genuine and intellectually curious compared to Harper's increasing tendency toward manufactured drama and constant attention-seeking behavior across social media platforms. She arrived at my door with a weathered duffel bag and an infectious enthusiasm about surprising her older sister, immediately picking up on the subtle tension between Harper and me even though I thought I'd been maintaining a convincingly normal facade throughout the evening's preparations. Harper seemed genuinely pleased to see Hazel initially, hugging her sister with what appeared to be real affection and excitement about the unexpected visit, but her mood shifted dramatically when she received an urgent text message from Damien about what he described as an emergency work meeting that apparently couldn't wait until after her birthday dinner had concluded. I watched Harper struggle visibly between family obligation and whatever powerful pull Damien represented in her current emotional landscape, ultimately choosing to leave for what she hastily explained was a crucial client presentation that had suddenly been rescheduled to Saturday evening due to Monday morning deadline pressures. The excuse was transparently weak and poorly constructed, especially since I'd heard Harper mention earlier that same week how their advertising agency maintains strict policies against scheduling weekend meetings unless there was a genuine client crisis or major account emergency, but I simply nodded with understanding and suggested she handle whatever work situation required her immediate professional attention. After Harper left with repeated promises to return within just a few hours once the meeting concluded, Hazel offered to help me clean up the dinner dishes and remaining birthday preparations, seeming genuinely confused and slightly hurt by her sister's decision to prioritize work obligations over spending time with family who had driven 3 hours specifically to celebrate with her. Our conversation began casually enough, with Hazel asking thoughtful questions about my food truck business model and current expansion plans, but gradually evolved into something much deeper and more meaningful as we discovered unexpected common ground around sustainable living practices, environmental consciousness, and shared values about making positive impacts through our respective career choices. I mentioned my growing interest in developing more locally sourced menu options and potentially incorporating responsibly caught seafood from Pacific Northwest fisheries into my future restaurant concept, which immediately sparked Hazel's professional interest and genuine personal passion for marine conservation and sustainable food systems. She began explaining the intricate complexities of sustainable fishing practices, marine ecosystem management challenges, and the potential for restaurants and food service businesses to educate consumers about making environmentally responsible dining choices, speaking with an enthusiasm and depth of knowledge that I found genuinely captivating and intellectually stimulating. This was so remarkably different from Harper's tendency to dominate conversations with complaints about advertising agency politics, social media engagement statistics, or interpersonal drama with coworkers who apparently didn't appreciate her creative vision or professional contributions. As the evening progressed and Harper's promised few hours stretched past midnight with no communication about her expected return time, Hazel and I found ourselves engaged in increasingly deep discussions about everything from climate change impacts on coastal communities to the realistic potential for small businesses like restaurants to create meaningful environmental education opportunities for their customers and local communities. There was an intellectual connection developing between us that surprised both of us with its natural intensity and effortless flow, combined with an emotional honesty and mutual respect that felt refreshingly authentic after months of navigating Harper's increasing defensiveness, emotional manipulation, and growing distance from our relationship's fundamental foundations. Hazel admitted she'd always found me genuinely kind and thoughtful during family gatherings over the past 2 years, contrasting those observations with Harper's established pattern of taking people for granted and constantly seeking validation from new sources rather than appreciating the relationships and opportunities she already possessed. She mentioned having observed how Harper seemed to require constant male attention and professional approval, cycling through different men who could provide whatever specific type of emotional support, career guidance, or social validation she felt was missing from her current situation at any given moment. Over the following weeks, Harper's relationship with Damien intensified significantly while I maintained my new policy of polite indifference and redirected all my emotional energy into expanding my food truck business into the brick-and-mortar restaurant I'd been methodically planning for over a year. Harper began staying out progressively later on what she claimed were essential work nights, often not returning to my apartment until well past midnight with increasingly elaborate explanations about urgent client deadlines, creative brainstorming sessions that couldn't be interrupted, and exclusive industry networking events that somehow always seemed to involve just her and Damien working together in private settings away from their office environment. She started canceling our previously established plans with growing frequency, including date nights we'd scheduled weeks in advance and weekend activities I'd specifically requested time off from the food truck to accommodate, always citing urgent work emergencies that apparently couldn't be postponed or rescheduled for more convenient times that wouldn't conflict with our personal relationship. Rather than expressing frustration, demanding detailed explanations, or questioning the legitimacy of these constant work crises like the old version of myself might have done, I simply acknowledged her cancellations with polite understanding and used the newly freed time to research commercial kitchen spaces, develop deeper relationships with local organic suppliers, and work on the comprehensive business plan that would be absolutely essential for securing the substantial restaurant loan I'd been preparing to apply for through my credit union. When Harper finally worked up the courage to admit that she and Damien had kissed during one of their late-night work sessions, carefully explaining it away as an isolated moment of emotional vulnerability that occurred during a particularly stressful project deadline and insisting it didn't mean anything significant about her feelings or intentions, I listened to her confession with genuine calm and simply nodded thoughtfully before suggesting we should probably take time to reassess our relationship priorities and determine what we each actually wanted from our romantic partnership moving forward. The complete lack of dramatic reaction clearly frustrated Harper, who seemed to have expected jealousy, anger, demands for specific details about their physical intimacy, or perhaps even an ultimatum that would force her to choose definitively between Damien and me, potentially giving her the emotional drama and validation she appeared to crave from these types of complicated relationship situations. Instead, my measured and rational response left her visibly confused about how to proceed with whatever internal narrative she'd constructed about our relationship's fundamental problems and her psychological justifications for seeking emotional and physical intimacy with someone else while still expecting me to remain committed and available. Meanwhile, Hazel and I had begun exchanging text messages regularly about marine conservation efforts, sustainable food sourcing practices, and her genuinely fascinating research into Pacific Northwest fishing industry regulations, environmental impact assessments, and policy recommendations that could help protect coastal ecosystems while supporting local fishing communities. She offered to help me develop an innovative ocean-to-table menu concept for my planned restaurant expansion, enthusiastically combining her extensive academic knowledge of sustainable seafood sourcing with my culinary expertise and long-standing commitment to environmentally responsible business practices that could serve as an educational model for other establishments. Our conversations evolved naturally from professional collaboration and shared environmental interests to increasingly personal connection, discussing everything from our individual environmental values and career aspirations to what we each hoped to accomplish through our respective fields and how we wanted to make meaningful positive impacts on our communities. The intellectual stimulation and emotional authenticity I consistently found in my communications with Hazel stood in increasingly stark contrast to the superficial and manipulative interactions I was having with Harper, who seemed more concerned with managing her public image and developing elaborate justifications for her behavior than engaging in genuine relationship problem-solving or honest communication about our obvious fundamental incompatibilities and different life priorities. The inevitable confrontation finally arrived on a Tuesday evening in late October when Harper discovered my extensive text conversations with Hazel while using my phone to order takeout food from our usual Thai restaurant, since her own phone had died during the day and she needed to place our dinner order before the restaurant stopped accepting deliveries for the evening. I'd been in the shower when she apparently began scrolling through my recent messages and discovered the growing emotional intimacy and intellectual connection between Hazel and me, including our detailed discussions about sustainable restaurant concepts, shared environmental values, collaborative menu development ideas, and our concrete plans to meet in person when Hazel returned from her current 3-week research expedition to finalize the comprehensive ocean-to-table menu development project we'd been enthusiastically working on together. When I emerged from the bathroom wearing a towel, Harper was sitting rigidly on my couch holding my phone with an expression of absolute fury mixed with what appeared to be genuine shock and betrayal, as if she'd discovered something completely unexpected and devastating rather than simply finding evidence of the exact same type of emotional connection and intimate communication she'd been developing with Damien for months while living in my apartment. She immediately launched into heated accusations about me going after her younger sister behind her back, characterizing my friendship and growing relationship with Hazel as a deliberately calculated attempt to hurt her and get revenge for her emotional affair with Damien, while simultaneously defending her own relationship as completely different and more legitimate because it was work-related and therefore somehow more understandable or professionally justified than my personal connection with someone who shared my values. The blatant hypocrisy was so obvious and absurd that I almost laughed out loud, but instead I maintained my calm demeanor and pointed out that I was simply following her own established example of developing close emotional friendships with members of the opposite sex, forming intimate connections based on shared interests and compatible values, and finding intellectual stimulation and genuine understanding with someone who actually appreciated those qualities rather than taking them for granted or dismissing them as inadequate. Harper's response revealed the fundamental selfishness and double standards that had been underlying our relationship problems all along, as she insisted with obvious desperation that her situation with Damien was entirely different because they worked together professionally and had legitimate business obligations that required them to spend extensive time together, while my connection with Hazel was purely personal and therefore represented a serious betrayal of our relationship's boundaries and her trust in my commitment. I calmly explained that emotional intimacy was emotional intimacy regardless of the specific setting or circumstances where it developed, and that if she could justify forming deep personal connections with Damien because of shared professional interests and career ambitions, then I could certainly form meaningful connections with someone who shared my environmental values, business aspirations, and vision for making positive impacts through sustainable food service. When Harper demanded that I choose immediately between maintaining any future contact with Hazel and preserving what remained of our romantic relationship, presenting this ultimatum as if it were a perfectly reasonable request rather than an obvious attempt to control my behavior while continuing her own emotional affair without consequences, I chose Hazel without any hesitation, doubt, or need for additional consideration. The decision felt completely natural and inevitable, reflecting months of growing realization that Harper and I wanted fundamentally different things from life, relationships, and partnership, and that I'd been settling for someone who didn't appreciate or value the qualities that actually mattered to me as a person and potential life partner. I finally explained clearly to Harper that her emotional affair with Damien had actually provided me with valuable clarity about exactly what I wanted in a relationship, which was genuine intellectual connection, shared values and long-term goals, mutual respect and appreciation, rather than the constant drama, emotional manipulation, and validation-seeking behavior that had characterized most of our time together over the past several months. As my relationship with Harper officially ended with her moving out of my apartment within the week following our final confrontation, my food truck business experienced unexpected and remarkably significant growth that seemed perfectly timed with my personal life changes and renewed focus on professional development. A highly influential local food blogger named Marcus Chin had discovered my truck during the busy lunch rush on a Friday afternoon and was genuinely impressed by my sustainable sourcing practices, innovative sandwich combinations featuring locally produced ingredients, and what he described in his subsequent review as my authentic commitment to environmental responsibility in food service operations, which led to a comprehensive feature article about my business philosophy and detailed future expansion plans. The article highlighted my established partnerships with local organic farms, my systematic commitment to minimizing food waste through careful inventory management and creative menu planning, and the innovative ocean-to-table concept I was developing with input from cutting-edge marine biology research, though Marcus didn't know about the personal connection behind that particular collaboration. Within just days of the article's publication in Portland's most widely read food and lifestyle magazine, my daily sales increased by almost 40%, and I started receiving serious inquiries from potential investors who were specifically interested in supporting the brick-and-mortar restaurant concept I'd been methodically developing, with several expressing particular enthusiasm for the environmental education component that would teach customers about sustainable food choices and marine conservation efforts. Meanwhile, Harper's work performance at the advertising agency began suffering noticeably as her relationship with Damien became increasingly awkward and professionally complicated following the definitive end of our romantic relationship and her discovery of my growing connection with her sister. According to mutual friends who still worked within Portland's relatively small advertising community, Damien had apparently realized that Harper had been using him primarily as a tool to make me jealous and to validate her desirability rather than developing genuine romantic feelings or professional respect for him as a person, which created significant ongoing tension in their daily working relationship and raised uncomfortable questions among their colleagues about Harper's judgment, professionalism, and ability to maintain appropriate workplace boundaries. The uncomfortable workplace dynamic became so problematic and disruptive to team productivity that Harper was eventually transferred to a completely different account team, effectively ending her daily collaboration with Damien and leaving her feeling professionally isolated and personally embarrassed about the complicated situation she'd created through her emotional manipulation and relationship games. During this same transformative period, my relationship with Hazel naturally and organically transitioned from friendship and professional collaboration to genuine romance as she returned from her 3-week research expedition with new data about sustainable fishing practices, and we began spending increasing amounts of time together, both working intensively on the restaurant concept and exploring our personal compatibility and shared life goals. She enthusiastically helped me scout potential locations for the restaurant while simultaneously completing her demanding master's thesis research, and our shared passion for environmental sustainability and social responsibility created a remarkably solid foundation for both personal partnership and professional collaboration that felt authentic, effortless, and mutually supportive. Our conversations flowed naturally and seamlessly between detailed business planning sessions and intimate personal discussions about our individual dreams, covering everything from specific menu development and supplier relationship management to our long-term goals for making measurable positive environmental impacts through our respective career paths and collaborative efforts. Hazel brought academic rigor, scientific methodology, and research-based perspectives to the restaurant planning process that perfectly complemented my practical culinary experience and entrepreneurial business instincts, while I provided the industry knowledge, creative energy, and implementation skills that helped her envision how theoretical scientific research could translate into concrete real-world applications that would simultaneously benefit consumers, local fishing communities, and marine ecosystems. Harper's desperate attempts to reconcile began approximately 6 weeks after she'd moved out, initially working through mutual friends who suggested I was being unreasonably harsh and unforgiving about her mistakes, then escalating to direct text messages apologizing profusely for her behavior and claiming she'd made a terrible mistake by choosing Damien over our established relationship and shared history together. 8 months after my definitive breakup with Harper, I found myself navigating the potentially awkward and emotionally complex situation of attending the annual 4th of July barbecue hosted by Harper and Hazel's parents at their comfortable family home in suburban Portland, an event that had become a cherished tradition during my 2-year relationship with Harper and one that Hazel's parents had specifically and warmly invited me to continue attending despite the obviously complicated family dynamics that my relationship transition had created. I'd been genuinely uncertain about whether attending would be appropriate or comfortable for everyone involved, particularly given the potential for family tension and Harper's likely negative reaction to seeing Hazel and me together as a couple, But Hazel had firmly insisted that her parents genuinely wanted me there and that we shouldn't allow Harper's poor relationship decisions to prevent us from maintaining meaningful connections with people who had sincerely welcomed me into their extended family circle over the past several years. The gathering turned out to be the perfect opportunity for Hazel and me to publicly announce our engagement to her extended family, which had occurred just 2 weeks earlier during a romantic and memorable weekend trip to the Oregon coast where we'd been finalizing crucial supplier relationships and location scouting for our upcoming restaurant venture while enjoying the beautiful coastal environment that was so central to Hazel's research and our shared business concept. We also used the festive family occasion to share our detailed and ambitious plans for opening Tide and Table, our innovative farm-to-sea restaurant that would feature exclusively locally sourced ingredients, rigorously sustainable seafood practices, and comprehensive marine conservation education programs specifically designed to teach customers about responsible dining choices, environmental stewardship, and the direct connections between food choices and ocean ecosystem health. Harper's parents, who had initially expressed some understandable concern about the potential complications and family tensions that might arise from their 2 daughters having romantic relationships with the same man, albeit at completely different times and under very different circumstances, quickly and enthusiastically embraced our relationship and business partnership after witnessing firsthand the genuine emotional connection, deep mutual respect, and perfectly aligned shared values that Hazel and I had developed together over the past several months. The stark contrast between the constant drama, emotional volatility, attention-seeking behavior, and general relationship instability that had characterized my previous turbulent relationship with Harper and the remarkably stable, intellectually stimulating, mutually supportive, and genuinely harmonious partnership I had established with Hazel was immediately obvious to everyone at the gathering, including extended family members, longtime family friends, and neighbors who had observed both relationships developing over time and had their own perspectives on the dramatic differences in relationship dynamics. Harper's father, a practical and observant man who had always been polite but somewhat reserved during my relationship with Harper, took me aside during the afternoon festivities to express his sincere happiness about my engagement to Hazel, specifically mentioning that he'd always respected my work ethic, character, and treatment of his family, but had definitely noticed how much more relaxed, genuinely content, and authentically happy I seemed since beginning my relationship with his younger daughter. Harper's mother was even more direct and enthusiastic in her support of our relationship, taking both Hazel and me aside to tell us that she'd been increasingly concerned about Harper's established pattern of taking good relationships for granted and constantly seeking validation and excitement from new sources rather than learning to appreciate and nurture what she already had in her life. When Harper herself finally arrived at the barbecue fashionably late with a new boyfriend she'd been casually dating for only a few weeks, someone she'd apparently met through a dating app and who seemed visibly uncomfortable with the family setting and dynamics, she immediately attempted to create tension and drama by suggesting to various family members that I had deliberately and manipulatively pursued Hazel as some form of calculated revenge against her, characterizing our relationship as inappropriate and emotionally manipulative given the complicated family connections and history involved in the situation. However, her obvious attempts to undermine our relationship, garner sympathy for herself, and position herself as a victim of my alleged manipulation backfired completely and embarrassingly when her own mother firmly and publicly reminded her that she had voluntarily chosen Damien over me, had ended our relationship through her own actions and choices, and therefore had absolutely no right whatsoever to object to my happiness or to attempt to interfere with her sister's relationship choices and life decisions. The family's unified and enthusiastic support for our engagement and innovative business venture effectively shut down Harper's manipulation attempts and made it crystal clear that everyone present recognized the genuine authenticity and positive nature of what Hazel and I had built together through shared values and mutual respect. 1 full year later, Hazel and I celebrated the highly anticipated grand opening of Tide and Table, which had quickly established itself as a genuine Portland success story by masterfully combining innovative sustainable cuisine with comprehensive marine conservation education programs that attracted both serious food enthusiasts and dedicated environmental advocates from throughout the Pacific Northwest region and beyond. The restaurant exceeded our most optimistic financial and social impact projections from the very first month of operation, with customers consistently praising not only our creative and seasonally changing menu featuring exclusively locally sourced ingredients and responsibly caught seafood, but also our unique educational approach that helped diners understand the direct environmental impact of their food choices and the critical importance of supporting sustainable fishing practices and marine conservation efforts. We had successfully created exactly the type of socially responsible business we'd envisioned during our early conversations and planning sessions, establishing a place where exceptional dining experiences and meaningful environmental education work together seamlessly to create lasting positive impacts on both customer awareness and broader industry practices throughout the region. The restaurant's success had also attracted attention from environmental organizations, culinary schools, and sustainable business advocates who used Tide and Table as a model for how restaurants could effectively combine profitability with social responsibility and environmental education. Meanwhile, Harper's life had taken a dramatically different and increasingly difficult trajectory as she continued struggling with the long-term consequences of the impulsive choices she'd made during our relationship and in the months immediately following our breakup. She had lost her position at the advertising agency approximately 6 months earlier due to ongoing workplace drama and interpersonal conflicts stemming from her complicated and unprofessional situation with Damien, combined with her demonstrated inability to maintain appropriate professional boundaries and focus consistently on her actual job responsibilities rather than personal relationship management and social media engagement. Following her termination from the agency, she had attempted to reinvent herself as a social media influencer and lifestyle blogger, investing her limited savings in professional photography and content creation equipment. But her efforts had been largely unsuccessful due to her established tendency toward manufactured drama and her obvious lack of authentic expertise in any particular area that would attract and maintain a dedicated, engaged following willing to support sponsored content. Her various attempts at monetizing her online presence through sponsored posts, affiliate marketing partnerships, and collaboration with brands had generated minimal income, barely covering her basic living expenses, and she was currently sharing a small apartment with a roommate while working multiple part-time retail positions to make ends meet, all while continuing to pursue her increasingly unrealistic dreams of social media fame and financial independence through online content creation and influencer marketing. As Hazel and I actively planned our wedding for the following spring, carefully choosing a beautiful coastal venue overlooking the Pacific Ocean that perfectly represented our shared love for marine environments, environmental conservation, and the natural beauty that had brought us together through our work, Harper made one final and particularly desperate attempt to disrupt our happiness and create the kind of dramatic, attention-grabbing situation she seemed to require for her emotional well-being and sense of self-importance. 3 weeks before our carefully planned wedding date, she systematically contacted several of our mutual friends, some of Hazel's family members, and even reached out to local wedding vendors, claiming she had discovered conclusive evidence of my alleged manipulation of her sister and suggesting that I had deliberately and calculatedly pursued Hazel as part of some elaborate long-term revenge scheme against her rather than developing genuine romantic feelings based on natural compatibility and authentically shared values and life goals. Her accusations were so obviously fabricated, her evidence so transparently non-existent, and her motivations so clearly selfish and attention-seeking that instead of creating the chaos, doubt, and family conflict she apparently hoped for, Harper's final interference attempt became a moment of definitive closure and validation for everyone involved in our lives. Rather than dignifying Harper's baseless accusations with detailed responses or allowing her manufactured drama to overshadow our wedding preparations and the celebration we'd worked so hard to plan, Hazel calmly and confidently explained to anyone who expressed concern that unlike Harper's well-documented need for external validation and constant attention from multiple sources throughout her adult life, her relationship with me was built on genuine mutual respect, clearly aligned shared goals, authentic emotional intimacy, and a partnership that had consistently proven itself through reliable actions and sustained commitment rather than manipulative words and attention-seeking behavior. The stark contrast between Harper's desperate and increasingly pathetic attention-seeking behavior and our solid, stable relationship foundation was so obvious to everyone who knew us that her final manipulation attempt actually strengthened family and friend support for our marriage rather than creating the doubt, conflict, and disruption she'd clearly intended to achieve through her interference.